Welcome to CFRI's Cystic Fibrosis Community Voices, a video podcast series created by and for the cystic fibrosis community.
So we are going to launch this, and as we can see, this is a town hall meeting. So with that comes a wonderful gift of some informality. So as we log in, I would say to everybody, use your cameras. We'd love to see your faces. I really welcome everybody to the CFRI's online town hall discussion about GI issues faced by those living with CF. I'm Siri Vaeth, and I'm the Executive Director of CFRI, and I am also the mother of a young adult woman with cystic fibrosis. We are so thrilled to have this town hall meeting, and we love the way we are trying to reach everybody in every which way. And so we've had dozens of people sign up from across the United States to participate in this Zoom discussion. And then we also are streaming this live on Facebook Live, so welcome to all the people who are watching on Facebook. And I do just want to let people know that if you are watching on Facebook, there is a little lag time just by a technological thing that we cannot change that might be up to 10 seconds. So I just like to warn you before Michelle does her great presentation and her slides. So again, this is, if you could see our little studio here, we've got many cameras and computers going, and so we hope that technology stays with us the whole time. Before we go any further, I do want to thank Vertex Pharmaceuticals, Gilead Sciences, and Chiesi USA for their sponsorship of this podcast series, and I want to thank AbbVie and Genentech for their additional support. The technical part of this, please mute your mics if you haven't done so already. And when we get to the part where there's a group discussion, when we did this town hall meeting for the 5 feet apart discussion, we had so many people participating, and we had people click on the hand to raise the hand, and then we'd unmute. I think we're going to live a little dangerously this time as an experiment, because we will be holding more of these meetings, and so you learn as you go and find out what works best. So this time we're going to ask people to stay muted, and then when it is discussion, if you're wanting to add something, you can unmute yourself. And just be mindful of when somebody else is speaking, and then jump in. You won't have to click to raise the hand. So we'll see how that goes. If it's too much chaos, we can go back to the hands. So I'm very honored to be here with Michelle Stroebe, who is the dietitian at the Adult CF Center at Stanford, and we will be hearing from her shortly. I know also we had hoped that Becca Roanhouse would be here in the room with us to share her experiences, but as all of us in the CF community know, health is capricious, and unfortunately she became ill yesterday and was unable to join us, but she hopefully can log in somewhere and watch. So a key motivator for this town hall meeting was an incredible event that we held almost a year ago in Maryland, and it was an externally led patient-focused drug development meeting on CF. And this is a program we worked with the FDA to have this meeting to bring the patient voice to representatives of the FDA, but also to the broader community, to researchers, clinicians, and drug development companies. And so as part of this, we wanted to know what symptoms really impacted people with CF, what was the burden of care for those living with CF, and what hopes people had for new therapies. And so as we did this, we had people in the room and panelists. We also live streamed it to the nation, and people could watch and send in their questions and actually email in comments. We also had people had the ability to call in and have their comments. We did live polling. It was extraordinarily complex, but really exciting and fun to see how many people were engaged on this day, and it was incredibly moving, the presentations. And one thing that came out of this that was a surprise maybe to everybody but those with CF was that when asked what symptom of CF had like the greatest regular daily impact on quality of life, GI issues were ranked above respiratory issues. And of course, most people, when they think about CF, they think about lung disease, respiratory illness, and that, but indeed, in terms of daily impacts and coping with that symptom, it was GI issues. And so people really shared very honestly about, issues with blockages and painful pancreatitis and embarrassing gas and constipation and diarrhea that are just so challenging and consistently an issue. So tonight, we're really lucky because we have an incredible dietitian with us, Michelle Stroebe, as I said, dietitian at the Adult CF Center at Stanford, and she's going to give us a brief overview of what all is going on with the CFGI system. And then we are going to open it up for questions. I'll launch some questions, and I'm really hoping everybody will jump in and participate, and we can actually have a whole discussion about it. And just so you all know, those of you on Zoom, we really do hope that you'll use your cameras because it's so much more fun when we can see your faces. Also, we are recording this, and we're going to take all the resulting pieces and create a podcast that will be posted so other people can learn from this. And really, in many ways, this is an enduring addition to the patient-focused drug development meeting. And from that, we have this, I don't know if people can see on the camera, but we made this report. And it's really will be wonderful to say, for more information, you can also watch this podcast and learn. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Siri, for having me and CFRI and everybody here. Thanks for participating today. As Siri mentioned, I am the adult cystic fibrosis dietitian at Stanford. I have the privilege of seeing my CF patients pre and post lung transplant and also in and outpatient. So I see a lot of things in our center. We have about 400 patients. So we have a big center and a big team. And I can say that GI issues are definitely something that we come across very often. And our team is pretty aggressive about it. And it's something that I really, really love talking about. And so if any of you have heard me speak before, you've definitely seen some of these things. But I tried to kind of make it brief so we can make a good presentation and kind of talk with the community. So first, just a quick disclaimer. This presentation is really meant for educational and informational purposes. It's not meant as medical advice. It's not intended to replace your center or your team, and really try and keep everything kind of, more generic and not specific questions so that everybody can participate in the discussion. So briefly today, we're going to go over some common complications, GI complications in cystic fibrosis, including constipation, DIOS, pancreatic insufficiency, gastroparesis, and gas and bloating. So first, I always like to kind of go back and start with the basics. Really, what is the GI tract? A lot of times, we providers use these kind of big words and kind of, diagnoses and things that we talk about, and we don't really step back and kind of start from the basics. And a lot of you may have heard us talk about the GI tract, and you have a general idea of what it is, but really like to break it down. And if you can see that kind of slide on the right side there, that's my favorite slide ever. But I have the physiology on the left side as well. So essentially, the GI tract is your digestive tract, and it starts from your mouth and it goes through your anus, and it includes all the accessory organs that are needed to digest food and process waste. Essentially, the GI tract is where food that you eat is turned into the nutrients your body needs to do the things that you want to do. So walking, talking, breathing, keeping your heart beating, all of these things. Next, we'll talk about constipation and DIOS in cystic fibrosis. And again, this is a brief overview, but we can go through more questions if you guys have them. So constipation. Constipation is essentially stool impaction in the colon. This is usually associated with reduced number of stools every day or smaller volume stools. So we can see that our patients, may be normally having 2 stools a day, 3 stools a day regularly, and all of a sudden they may be having 1 stool a day. Or they may still be having their 2 stools a day, but they're smaller in volume. So this is what we consider constipation. It may also be seen as what's called overflow diarrhea, and this is when we have patients who all of a sudden have a lot of liquid stools. So suddenly, again, that person who normally has 2 stools a day comes to us with 7 or 8 bowel movements a day that are very small in volume and not really satisfying. So this is also considered constipation in our cystic fibrosis patients. These bowel movements are usually hard and pebbly, and they're hard to pass. And it's associated with gas, bloating, and abdominal pain and distension. You may be asking, why does it matter? I think a lot of our patients ask this all the time. Why do we always talk about poop? Why does this really matter? A little bit of gas here and there. I mean, some of you might definitely understand why this matters. But one of the first things that we do really think about is discomfort and pain really can reduce your not only quality of life, but it can also reduce your food intake. So when we reduce food intake, obviously that will lead to weight loss. And especially in the cystic fibrosis population, this is something that we really do want to pay a lot of attention to. Additionally, this can lead to rectal prolapse, hemorrhoids, and furthermore, untreated or poorly managed constipation can lead to DIOS. And we'll talk about that on the next slide, what it is and why it's important. But essentially, this is a more severe form of constipation, and it's pretty challenging medically to treat. Patients who have DIOS or even constipation and go to hospitals that are not familiar with cystic fibrosis or cystic fibrosis GI issues may have a trickier situation. So this is why we really like to empower our patients about what GI issues they may come across. So DIOS. DIOS. This is distal intestinal obstructive syndrome. Some people might say DIOS, but this is specific to our CF patients, and we specifically see this mostly in our pancreatic insufficient patients. However, we do have some case reports of pancreatic sufficient patients. So essentially, most often our patients who take enzymes, we see this. This is a type of constipation that is a buildup of stool caused by mucus buildup in the intestines. And this is versus constipation, which is a buildup of stool in the colon. The onset can be very sudden and can cause very extreme discomfort. Our patients can see symptoms such as abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, intolerance to eating, even water. Sometimes they'll end up vomiting, and abdominal extension. So a lot of times our patients will describe it as a pregnant belly, for example. So I mentioned that DIOS is only seen in our CF patients. So this is a CF-specific bowel obstruction. And there's several reasons for this. First and foremost, meconium ileus at birth, this will increase the risk of DIOS in our cystic fibrosis patients. Additionally, pancreatic insufficiency requiring enzymes in our cystic fibrosis patients can increase the risk for several reasons. First of all, missing, skipping, or underdosing of enzymes, or even imperfect digestion with perfect enzyme use, both of these things will lead to what's called malabsorption. Malabsorption leads to sticky intestinal mucus. On top of this, the CFTR gene that causes cystic fibrosis, this alone can lead to impaired intestinal motility or movement, so this leads to a slow gut, combined with an impaired intestinal secretion, which is a dry gut. So essentially, with malabsorption and these other intestinal motility and intestinal secretion impairments, we see a sticky gut that's slow and dry. This leads to harder to pass stools. This is why our cystic fibrosis patients are more prone to DIOS and constipation. Briefly, we'll talk a little bit about pancreatic insufficiency and enzymes. You can see on the slide here, these are our digestive enzymes. So this is our pancreas here on the left. This is one of our accessory organs that helps us digest and absorb our nutrients. So you can see the amylase, protease, and lipase. These help digest our starches, our proteins, and our fats. Essentially, when we eat a hamburger, we need our digestive enzymes to utilize the nutrients, and this will be digested in our small intestine with digestive enzymes and used as nutrients. So about 85 to 90% of our CF patients are pancreatic insufficient, requiring digestive enzymes when eating. There's several reasons that patients with cystic fibrosis have an increased risk of pancreatic insufficiency, but first and foremost, we do see that the pancreatic enzyme delivery to the small intestine is essentially blocked by thick mucus. What that means is when our cystic fibrosis patients who have pancreatic insufficiency do eat, you eat, you get food into your mouth, it goes into your stomach and then into the small intestine. When that food is in the small intestine, our patients with cystic fibrosis and pancreatic insufficiency, because of those blockages in the pancreas in the ducts that lead into the small intestine, they're blocked. So that mucus that's in our lungs can also be in the small intestine. And those digestive enzymes can actually reach the small intestine. So that's one of the reasons. We also see that a low pH in the small intestine can lead to more malabsorption. So there's multiple reasons there. You can see the symptoms on the bottom of the screen, but essentially floating, greasy, fatty stools, inability to gain weight. You may be asking again, why does this matter? And there's a lot of reasons why pancreatic insufficiency and taking proper doses of enzymes do matter. Just to name a few, we do see that pancreatic insufficiency without proper digestive enzymes leads to weight loss or really an inability to gain weight despite good calorie intake. On top of that, pancreatic insufficiency without having digestive enzymes will lead to poorly digested food that is stuck in the small intestine. This leads to gas, bloating, stomach aches and pains. It can lead to urgency to have a bowel movement, diarrhea, and also, again, constipation and DOS. So I like to bring this slide into most of my presentations. And this at the top, if you can read it, it says, when I take my enzymes, I get constipated. A little grease in the system helps keep me regular. And this is false. I've brought this in from another presentation, but I do think this is a really important point to come across. I see this in clinic oftentimes. So essentially, when we don't take enzymes, if we need them, or when we're taking lower doses than recommended, what essentially is happening is we're having a malabsorption of these nutrients. So again, these sticky stools that may initially be kind of easier to pass, but over time, this will lead to an increased risk for constipation and DOS. And in fact, we've found that the most common cause of constipation in our CF patients is actually malabsorption. So not a good idea to actually just reduce your enzymes. If you are having some constipation symptoms, talk to your team about that instead. We've also seen that taking a proper dose of enzymes can result in fewer, more formed stools due to proper absorption. So sometimes our CF patients who may be used to having 4, 5, 6 stools a day, all of a sudden they will be taking enzymes and properly digesting, and they might kind of get a little bit scared about having only 2 to 3 stools a day. So again, talk to your team because we do see that increased absorption of nutrients leads to decreased excretion of undigested nutrients. Also decreased gas, bloating, and constipation, and again, increased calories utilized. So when you're actually taking your enzymes and eating, you're utilizing those calories, and all that money and effort you're putting into eating to gain weight is actually being absorbed. So it's a really good idea. Briefly, we'll talk about gastroparesis. So gastroparesis is basically delayed emptying of food or gastric contents from the stomach into the small intestine. And this is really common after lung transplant and also with poorly controlled diabetes. We also see that the slow gut, essentially, that we see in our CF patients may also increase risk of gastroparesis. The symptoms of this are fullness with eating, even small amounts. People will take a few bites of a sandwich, for example, and feel completely full. Bloating, nausea, vomiting, and particularly vomiting of undigested food, and also heartburn. Gastroparesis diet is low fiber and lower in fat. Obviously, with our CF patients, we want to be careful with saying a low-fat diet. So generally what I recommend is spreading the fats throughout the day instead of a low-fat diet. And this is something you guys can definitely talk to your team more about. Small, frequent meals and snacks. And one of the things to keep in mind is that liquids do generally empty normally. And so high-calorie beverages are really often recommended with gastroparesis and cystic fibrosis. And last but not least important, gas and bloating. So what causes gas and bloating? I have to say there are a million reasons why people might have gas and bloating. So I just wanted to touch on a few here. First and foremost, we do see that with constipation comes a lot of gas and bloating. Essentially, there's a lot of undigested nutrients or a lot of fiber, particularly in the colon, and this can really feed the bacteria that's in there, the good bacteria we want sometimes in there, and this can cause, I'm skipping ahead to gas and bloating, yes. Also, we see small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or SIBO, and this is with frequent use of antibiotics. So our cystic fibrosis patients are chronically on antibiotics, and small intestinal bacterial overgrowth is pretty common, a pretty common cause of gas and bloating. Additionally, again, inadequate enzyme coverage can again lead to malabsorption, leading to gas and bloating. And also this slow intestinal transit or movement, this can lead to things kind of moving slowly through the colon and through the GI tract in general, and this can lead to gas and bloating. And lastly, I don't think Siri would let me be here at CFRI without bringing up the Bristol stool chart. So I do always like to mention constipation prevention. We at our center really try very much to be preventative and not reactive in terms of constipation. First and foremost, strict adherence to enzyme regimen and or really finding an adequate enzyme regimen is important. Again, we've talked a lot about malabsorption and how that can lead to constipation. So talk to your team if you have any questions about that. Good hydration, this is a really important thing to talk about these last few weeks here in California. It's been very hot. good hydration is very important for pretty much anybody who does have, is outside or is active, but particularly in the CF population. So really important to remember to increase hydration with exercise and also in the summer months. So drinking good electrolyte beverages and water is really important for your GI tract. And most importantly, a consistent bowel regimen. So our goal at our center is really 2 to 3 stools a day, Bristol type 3 to 4. So you can see on the right side of the screen there, type 3 to 4 stools. This is something we talk about in our clinic often. A lot of our patients know the Bristol stool chart. And we really try to titrate to these stools and making sure that our patients are aware of how to titrate their bowel regimen. And every single one of my CF patients has a different bowel regimen and a different thing that works for them. So really figuring that out for you is important. And now we can open it up to the community. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. And it's one of those things, even if you've heard it before, it's so good to have a reminder. I mean, I can say for myself personally, when you think of constipation, you think, my standard thing is you just don't go. And so there is, for me, that sense, oh, okay, you're still having bowel movements every day, but you are actually constipated. That is something I think a lot of people don't make that connection.
Absolutely, that's very common.
Incredibly important. So this is really about everybody, and we can see more and more beautiful faces on the screen. Everybody, hook up those cameras. We want to see you. So I guess I'm just going to open this up. I have some questions to generate discussion, and that doesn't mean these are the only questions. We can go off, have other issues if people have some burning topic. But I guess my first question was anybody that's online with us even surprised by the fact that GI issues rose to the top in terms of daily impacts versus respiratory issues? And again, just to remind you, if you want to speak, you can unmute and jump in.
I wasn't particularly surprised. I'm Devin, by the way. Hey, Michelle.
Hi.
Because I had been talking about it with someone else who doesn't have CF, but also about bowel obstruction. And I made some comment about how, for all the stuff I deal with my lens, my bowels are the ones that got closest to killing me with, very severe bowel obstruction.
Yeah.
So, kind of a severe way to look at it, but it was my thought process.
Yeah.
It's very true. We kind of forget that part of CF sometimes, and we're lucky at our center to be able to focus on it, but that's a really important point.
Anybody else?
Does it ever get to the point they require a colostomy or something with this?
We have been lucky at our center that we have had 1 or 2 patients come very close to a colostomy and not had one. We've been able to prevent that, luckily. But that being said, we have had a few patients who do need to go into surgery and have some resection, so part of their bowel was actually taken out. But again, we've been lucky, and that hasn't been often because we are, again, try to be very aggressive about bowel regimens and letting all of our patients know what our goals are and what their goals should be and how to prevent these things from happening.
Okay.
And as soon as you're done speaking, go on mute again.
I have an anatomical question. When you had that diagram up, the difference between the large bowel and the colon, aren't they all the same thing?
You're correct. So the large bowel is essentially the colon. So there's the large bowel or the large intestine and the small bowel or small intestine.
Okay, because I saw on the diagram there was large bowel and then there was colon sort of on the descending side.
It's a little, you are correct. So the colon is a little bit on the colon is the kind of the last part of it, but they essentially do bleed into one another. The large bowel is just kind of the overall kind of long part of digestion, and the colon is kind of where it ends, I guess I would say. But one and the same, similar.
Now,
Thank you.
Can I chip in?
Jump in.
Yeah, the way I understand it, you have the small bowel, which ends at the cecum. You have the ascending, transverse, descending colon, and then you have the well, now I'm hanging up here.
I know. I'm looking at my diagram right now.
You have the rectum, and all that together is the large bowel, including the rectum.
So the large bowel
it-
does not include the small intestine, however.
Correct.
So all of that is correct.
Small
Yeah.
intestine.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Thank you.
That's cool. Yeah, I went to medical school and
Perfect.
studied pediatrics, and I have a son with CF now, so
Gotcha.
it's coming in handy.
I imagine. Yeah. Thank you for that clarification. Definitely.
I'm the one that had the really bizarre question at the beginning of the chat discussion. Can I ask that now?
Yes.
I have an 11-year-old son. We go to University of Pittsburgh CF clinic, and they're really nice.
Yeah.
Couple questions. The first one is, does the caliber of the stool really tell you anything? My son has regular bowel movements. He's not constipated, but I tell you, that thing is like, he has autism also, so he doesn't flush. So I get to see it, and man, that would hurt coming out of me, and he's just a little kid.
I would say.
So, it's a very large.
I'm sorry.
No, it's a large caliber, much larger than you would expect. Is that typical, or does that tell you anything?
The caliber of stool is definitely important. So when I do ask my CF patients about their bowel movements, it's not just, are you having 1 a day or 2 a day? There's a list of 25 questions that I do ask. One of them being, does it take multiple flushes for your stools to be evacuated essentially from the toilet? So a lot of times with large stools, that answer would be yes. And so obviously not knowing everything with your son, I can say that, large volume stools that take multiple flushes generally can signal some form of either malabsorption or something else that is happening.
Well, they make what they call no-clog toilets now, which pretty much don't clog. And it gets it in one. It has something to do with siphon effect and Bernoulli principle and all that.
That's amazing. I love that. We don't have those here in California.
Yeah. Can't be low flow.
Exactly.
You gotta appreciate what dietitians and nutritionists do, because, a situation like my son, he started Kalydeco when he was 6. He went from 10th percentile in weight to over 95th.
That's amazing.
In about 6 months.
Wow.
I'm sure you've seen that with some other kids.
It's incredible.
We can't really get the weight off. I think the autism is part of it because of the food preferences. And he's so used to that high fat, high salt diet.
Yeah.
He's always hungry. That's pretty typical of CF too, right?
I do have to say, I don't actually see children. I only see adults, so over 18. So it's a little different.
I got you.
But I can say that we have seen in the last year or two a lot more issues with kind of overweight and those exact issues where we're trying to hone in the CF appetite and kind of tell people the exact opposite of what they've been told their whole lives, where it's, portion control and things that, to be fair, as a CF dietitian, I'm not used to saying. So I'm used to high calorie, high fat as well, and eat what you want. And so it's a change in my practice as well, but we do see those things more commonly, which is exciting with different things that are on the market and better absorption, really.
Where are you guys based out of?
I'm at Stanford in California.
Okay, I'm in southern West Virginia right now, and it's the most obese state in the nation because of the southern cooking.
Sure.
Everything's deep fried or bacon fat.
A little different.
Mashed potatoes. Yeah, and it's hard because my wife's from here, and that's how she cooks. And if you don't finish your plate, you're insulting somebody.
A little bit different than out here, that's for sure.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I've lived a few different places, and I know what you're saying. I'm pretty much done, and I'll listen, and thank you for your time.
Thank you for your question. I appreciate it.
Well, and thank you for that. I'm curious, just from everybody who's online, to share, what are the predominant GI issues that people are experiencing? Devin, you mentioned the blockages, bulky stools, clearly, but what are other issues for people that you're facing?
I've been dealing with a lot of SIBO lately, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Had a really interesting discussion with the new gastroenterologist that's joined National Jewish, and kind of what he's seeing about false negatives in testing for SIBO and CF, because we're on either chronic azithromycin or on, IV antibiotics that last kind of a long time. So they've been treating empirically and seeing some pretty good results with Xifaxan. Obviously, diet change and, less carbohydrate-based diet is interesting as well. But so I've just kind of begun that journey. I'm kind of normally a lung type issue CF person, so GI issues are new to me. But give me the insight. I would love to hear it, but it sounds like National Jewish is doing a lot of studies, and hopefully they'll publish soon.
Yeah. Welcoming you into the GI world with SIBO is a little rough. I apologize for that, unfortunately. SIBO is hard to manage for a lot of reasons that you mentioned, chronic antibiotic use and kind of trying to test and get negatives and all of these things. On top of that, what we do see for SIBO oftentimes is a pretty restrictive diet, which goes against a lot of our principles for our CF patients in terms of weight gain and weight maintenance. So as you mentioned, it's a pretty carbohydrate restricted diet. It's essentially low FODMAP, if any of you guys have heard that. There's a lot of words in there, but basically it's a lot of fruits and vegetables, dairy, gluten-free, all of these things. So it's really important if you do have SIBO, if you're on a low FODMAP diet, to really talk to your CF dietitian or a dietitian who does know CF to really make sure that your diet is not only appropriate for SIBO, but also incorporates the fats and the nutrients and the calories that you need as a CF patient. One of the things we see often is patients will go to providers who don't know CF again, and best intentions, but they may not know, the high fat needs, the high calorie needs, and that, sending you out with a handout on SIBO is not really adequate sometimes. So, really talk to your team and your dietitian there and see if they give you some good advice on those things, because it can be really tricky, I have to say. So good luck.
What is the diagnosis? How do they diagnose this?
So SIBO diagnosis is usually clinically. So we see gas and bloating pretty commonly. And then there is a breath test that people do. It's either a methane breath test or a lactulose breath test, I believe. And essentially we'll just tell you if you have active basically it's overgrowth of bacteria in your gut. We do have good bacteria in our gut that we want there, but this is when they kind of go a little bit crazy. And so it's usually diagnosed by a GI team, and kind of those tests that will tell us. And as she mentioned, a lot of times we'll put them on empiric antibiotics just to try and treat, and then also dietary changes.
So it's caused by use of antibiotics, but the treatment is antibiotics?
Exactly. Yeah. It's tricky, I have to say. Yeah. SIBO is one of the trickier things to really manage in CF, I would say.
Got it.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for that.
Do you see H. pylori a lot in CF patients in the adults?
I personally have not, but that's not saying that it's not there, but I have not seen it a lot, to be honest.
Okay. I'll take a look at them. I'm busy right now. And I'm not muted.
It's okay.
I have a question that with taking one's enzymes, we still have these issues about, Michelle, you know me personally, but needing to be on a low residue diet, and then we're kind of, I don't really understand how this, well, actually I do, but I want to share the fact that there was a time with the CF patients where I was advocating that we do the Mediterranean diet. Then I found out that's not really for us. There's too much fiber in it. Yet we take Amitiza, Mistoprostol, Miralax, to all make things move, but then you're not supposed to eat fiber. Because why is it our system cannot manage fiber?
So I have to say that everybody, you've probably heard me say this, every single CF patient is completely different. And while I have to say a lot of my CF patients, probably the majority of my CF patients, to be honest, can't handle fiber. There are some of my patients who swear by regular fruits and vegetables and whole grains and flaxseed and chia and all of these high fiber things. Generally, I can say though, a lot of our patients who have chronic constipation, chronic DOs, or a lot of patients with gastroparesis after lung transplant, for example, those patients tend to tolerate fiber not as well as somebody who doesn't have, chronic recurrent DOs or gastroparesis. And a lot of times that's because of triggers. So that's really why when somebody comes in for constipation or DOs, I really try to get to the bottom of what is happening. And a lot of times our patients will, tell me that they had a box of Fiber One bars before they came in because they felt constipated. And, when you Google constipation, it tells you to eat a high fiber diet. Or, they had a huge kale salad or something that's very fibrous. Essentially, with fiber, we have what's called insoluble and soluble fibers. And some of those fibers are not broken down very well by the GI system. And there's different reasons out there, and there's not a lot of evidence, to be perfectly honest, on a low fiber diet or even a high fiber diet in cystic fibrosis. But because of that mucus in the gut, we do believe, and again, this isn't medically proven, but we do believe that it may bind to that mucus and cause a little bit more slowing of the gut. But that, again, is case by case and patient by patient. However, with gastroparesis, that kind of delayed emptying that we do see in a lot of our CF patients, that is proven that fiber tends to sit in the stomach a lot longer. And when we have fiber in the stomach, it's one of the best weight loss tools, actually, is eating a high fiber diet. It draws water into the gut and into the stomach particularly, and it kind of keeps you full for longer. So with our gastroparesis patients, we tell them to avoid fiber or low fiber, because then it will help empty the stomach a little bit quicker. It's a very long answer to your question, Elise.
Hoping there's some trick to get around it.
Unfortunately. I wish. One day, I'm sure.
I actually had a question about enzymes. So I've been creeping up with the CFRD, and so I've cut out a lot of the super sugary stuff, and then to compensate for that weight-wise, I've upped the fat and upped the enzymes. But there's a daily limit with enzymes to prevent, burning your colon. And I was talking to somebody else having the same sort of issue, because we both don't want to do insulin and accidentally kill ourselves or anything like that. So can you tell, so if you do eat a ton of fat, why is there a daily limit of enzymes? And is it worse to take too many enzymes with one meal versus too many enzymes in the day?
It's a great question. So essentially, and I'm going to try and hit all of your questions there, but just remind me if I didn't catch all of them. Essentially what we saw, so you guys are all familiar with enzymes came on the market, and then in the 90s, sometime in the 90s, they all came off the market, and the FDA had to basically go through scrutiny to put them back on the market. That's essentially when, Ultrasa went to Ultraze, and Pancrease was Pancrease with an S, and all of these things happened on the market. Everything kind of got rebranded. Essentially what happened was we found that enzymes were really effective to help our CF patients gain weight and really extend their lives. And in the kind of more is better way we are here, people were taking up to hundreds of enzymes in a day. So it was just, people were just taking enzymes and there was no limit to them. So we saw what's called fibrosing colonopathy, and that is essentially hardening of the colon. And this was seen in our CF patients who were taking very high doses of enzymes over a prolonged period of time. And so when that whole thing happened with the FDA pulling them off the market and rebranding them and making sure, essentially what they were doing is they were making sure that they were safe. And with most drugs, if not all drugs, we have what's called a tolerable upper limit. And essentially this tells us at this level, we know that these drugs are safe. And so that upper limit level that you mentioned, Devin, that essentially is a level we give per meal and then also per day. So this is the level that we see that you can take every day without risk of fibrosing colonopathy. And what's really interesting about enzymes that a lot of patients aren't aware of is every single enzyme dose is based on the patient's enzyme dose, so that kind of number that they give you, and also their body weight and their pancreatic insufficiency status. So every single enzyme is titrated specifically to you. And when you do see a CF dietitian, I can tell you for a fact that when I see you, I titrate your dose and I do calculations to make sure you're not at that upper limit level. So, maybe your enzyme dose is 6 with meals, 3 with snacks, something like that. But you will get, you're going to have Thanksgiving dinner, you're going to have, a birthday dinner or something like that where you're going to just go crazy and have like the ice cream cake we have here on top of your pizza and a milkshake, and you're going to have some candy with it. And that day you're going to have...
I went to the state fair in Washington and they had deep fat fried butter.
There you go. Perfect example. How many enzymes do you need with that?
How do you even calculate?
I don't even know how many enzymes you could take with that, to be perfectly honest. Probably the bottle. I don't know. So there will be times when you go to a fair and you want deep fried butter. I can tell you that's probably really hard to calculate. You probably can't even come close. But, you will have days where you have not your 6, but you're taking 8 with a meal. And you're going to adjust that, but it's just the idea is overall making sure that your limit is lower than what is recommended. So usually you're given a daily limit, which is 10,000 units per day, and then a meal dose limit. So that's something that if you're worried about it, you can definitely talk to your dietitian and ask them, what is my upper limit per day? What is my upper limit per meal? And they can give you those specifics. I think I touched on all that.
I just was worried about, these one-time days where I need to go over the limit to account for how much fat I ate that day or something. So it sounds like as long as one day is probably not a bad thing. It's if I'm consistently going over.
Correct.
Then that's when you need to go, okay, this isn't working, and figure it out.
I would say that's correct. So, if it's one day and if your limit is 6 and then you're going to 15, that might be something you want to talk to somebody about. But when a patient comes to me and they're chronically on 6 and then all of a sudden they're taking 8 with meals, or they're taking 9 with meals, something's happening and we need to figure out why those enzymes aren't working anymore. So that's something really important to talk to your team about if those things are happening, if it's not just deep fried butter, basically. Mm-hmm.
And then one other question. So what are the symptoms of the hardening of the colon? Do you see it in your stools, or?
So to be perfectly honest, we haven't seen any cases of this at Stanford since I've been there. And there haven't been any documented cases of fibrosing colonopathy. That we actually looked into this a little bit ago, since the 90s. So it's very kind of nebulous, vague symptoms. And usually we haven't really seen any of it, and I hate to even bring them up because then everybody's gonna be like, I have it. So if you are concerned, talk to your team for sure. But again, since we've been really cautious about the enzymes, they've been back on the market, they've been tested and regulated really carefully, we haven't seen it.
Okay, thanks so much.
Of course, thank you.
So I have a question for everybody, and it's really something Michelle would love to hear about from you, because what I love about Michelle, it's like if she had a big banner with that chart with all the poop on it, she would have it.
100%.
She's the greatest advocate for sort of GI awareness in the CF community, and I love that about you. And so I know she's curious to know if you feel like in your clinics, and you do not need to name your centers, that doesn't matter per se, but rather as people with CF or parents of kids with CF, whether you feel your clinic pays enough attention to your GI symptoms, because it seems like quite often, so much emphasis is on your cultures and your lung function. Are you getting enough GI love?
Yeah.
Don't be shy.
Absolutely. My clinic does a great job. Yeah.
Awesome.
I feel very fortunate.
I'm glad.
Yeah, I have my own GI doctor, specialist, and everything. So.
Very nice.
Spend time. And is it doing a good job, mean that you're having specific time with your CF dietitian and they're asking these questions? What does that mean, that they're, who is doing a good job, and what makes it seem like they're
Yeah, I
very
am
on
actually
top of their
curious
game.
who's kind of bringing this up, because I know a lot of teams maybe don't have certain team members, and so that is a great question. Like, who talks to you about your poop, essentially, in clinic visits?
Yeah, we have a dietitian, and as I mentioned, a newly joined gastroenterologist to the CF team that sees patients separately now, but will likely be joining during clinic days to kind of make things more efficient. So
Wonderful.
and then pulmonologist asks as well, not kind of as many in-depth questions,
That's great.
but also very interested. So get it from all ends, which is great.
That's very good, definitely.
Yeah.
Elise.
Well, I'm a big fan of Michelle. I would say she gives me way more quality time than I think I would say. Much more so than the doctors. So
Thank you. You're sweet. Can you see me blushing?
One of the things I wanted to throw out there, which is the white elephant in the room, is the fact that when we travel and go visit people, it's so I will explain right up front. I am post-transplant, so this one issue is no longer an issue, but the other is always an issue. The pre-transplant was always being so self-conscious about doing my treatment when I was in somebody else's home. But then the bigger issue was, where's the bathroom? I didn't want to be anywhere near a kitchen or a living room. And I see now that post-transplant, it's just bad. It's as big as worse.
Oh,
You're just so
interesting.
self-conscious.
Yeah.
And you just wonder, is this ever the enzymes ever gonna improve, or? I'm curious if I throw it out to other even patients. If you hear that from patients, you don't want to go to the bathroom in public. You want to be at home.
Absolutely, and I think that's, across the board, just human nature. It makes sense. I can see that. It does cause issues, obviously, because as you are holding stool, if you need to go to the bathroom, that can cause more constipation, because as stool sits in your colon, we have more kind of water reabsorption, and that causes more hard stools. So completely understand that. I've definitely heard that. And it's just really becoming comfortable with yourself and, talking about your GI tract and talking about kind of the normal processes as we, there's that book that we get when we're 2 years old, Everybody Poops, right?
I was just thinking that.
So just being comfortable with the fact that, this is honestly, having bowel movements and having regular bowel movements is one of the best signs that you're healthy and that things are processing and they're absorbing. So really kind of trying to take that and being empowered by that. I mean, I know that's not helpful when you're in a public restroom and things are germy and gross and all of that, but, really trying to, I try really hard to try and flip things and make them seem, it is empowering, and it is something that, you should feel you're doing a good job, you're processing and you're absorbing your nutrients.
But and if I can jump in, when there's a young woman with CF, and we saw each other in an education day or something, and we were talking about that, and literally about all, being gassy, frequent bowel movements, bulky, smelly, and the self-consciousness that she felt, especially as a teenager, but really into adulthood and, in the workplace, and there's one restroom and you share it, and it's mortifying. And yes, so the inclination is you try not to go, and then you end up a whole other cascade of problems. And she said, but my life changed a little bit when I discovered this. And she reaches in her purse and she pulls out a bottle of that poopery that you spray in the toilet before, and it puts like the sheen of oil over the top. And it does help hold in the smell. I guess that's the principle. But I don't know. I've never analyzed it. But, and there was this huge ad campaign on YouTube or something with the beautiful young woman with like the ball gown in a public toilet stall saying, I poop. It's like, because it just didn't go with like the beautiful model look to be talking about that. But she said this really changed my life because I at least felt I could go somewhere and not be mortified. And I actually thought that's what would be the great handout, like tips that we should be collecting from all the members of the community. Like, what do you do to, make it so that you can feel more comfortable, and just share that and post it. So maybe that's what we should do, is just put out a call for for tips.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Public restrooms and guest houses when you're staying there and there's one bathroom and no fan.
That is a really good point, Siri.
So-
That's a really wonderful tip. Thank you. I'm going to pass that along.
And actually, I have a fantasy like when we have a conference, like all the bags when you check in, there has one in their thing. We'll see.
That's amazing.
We'll see if we can pull that off.
Yeah, please do.
And so, is that an issue for other people as well? Anybody else online that's had, embarrassment and then may have strategies for addressing it?
I just tell people it smelled like that when I got there.
It's a good strategy.
Like Ace Ventura, right? Go in there.
I love that.
We haven't run into that yet. 11-year-olds like farting and smelling up the place.
That's fair.
Yeah.
He's a boy. He's a boy.
Yeah, I think as a woman, it presents some interesting kind of, things. I'm 38 years old, so I feel like, in my 20s and teens, it was definitely something that,
Yeah.
you'd rather not be different in any way, shape, or form, let alone, in that area. But I think just growing up and being grateful I'm alive and grateful for what I have, it's just kind of what happens, and those that are around me, what to expect.
Good point.
Being more comfortable with me, and I guess that's the gift of getting older.
Absolutely. So, if there was like the magic medication, there are enzymes and those are magical because without them you would not absorb your nutrients. But in terms of the symptoms and the gas and the bloating and the constipation and the blockages, if you could tell a drug company, I want you to create this medication, what would you want from that?
Well, I take Amitiza, and it's completely changed my GI world. Digestion issues are still there, but the bowel obstructions have become way more manageable. I don't know if people out there know, but it opens up a different choroid ion channel and draws water into the whole gut, and it keeps me much more regular. And if I do get a bowel obstruction, it's much more easy to handle. I can drink water essentially, or go to the ER and get an IV, and it's instantly much better. So
Awesome.
Amitiza, that also does enzymes, I guess. A dual combo there.
There's another medication, Linzess, and I think Linzess is the one that actually targets the CFTR protein, and that's how it works. By it affects the regulation of sodium in and out of the bowel.
You mean Kalydeco? Wait, sorry, did you say this is Amitiza as well?
No, I think it's Linzess is the one that acts on the CFTR protein.
Okay. Because Amitiza works on, I think it's a calcium.
So that wouldn't work as well in someone with CF.
Yeah.
Because you don't have normal CFTR proteins.
Right.
And the last thing you'd want to do is start shutting them off.
So we do have patients. Go ahead, Elise, please.
I wanted to interject that I don't know what it's like pre-transplant, but post-transplant, they don't want you on Linzess because one of the side effects is it can cause infection. So Michelle, you probably could address that. If I know but I don't know if they use it in the CF world, but in the post-transplant CF world, they don't want you on it.
I do have patients on both Linzess and Amitiza with great success. Honestly, a lot of times it comes down to insurance, to be perfectly honest, to see which works, because they're both very expensive medications. But we have great success with both. And I do think it comes down to every single CF patient, every single CF gut is completely different. And so we try drugs and we see what will work. And I have a success with both, I have to say.
So we're almost out of time, so I want to end it with a question for Michelle. For anybody who watches this recording later, as a final tip, what should you make sure that your team is asking you about during a clinic visit related to your GI?
It's a really great question. I would say, as somebody had mentioned, I know a lot of our team members do ask about GI stuff. So we'll ask about bowel movements. And a lot of times I've been in the room and it just goes like, are you having bowel movements? Yes, great. And then they move on. So really talking to your team, because a lot of times those conversations happen and then I swing in afterwards and, the conversation goes more like, yeah, I have them sometimes, but I haven't had one for 5 days. Or I'm having stools, but they're totally light and greasy and floating and fatty, and I'm having stomach aches and all of these things. So really making sure that if you are having issues and you are experiencing symptoms, talk to your team about it. I can't tell you how many times I have my CF patients just kind of deal with pain and deal with these issues, because as CF patients, you guys are resilient and you're strong, and you a lot of times just have grown up dealing with these issues and taking pain as just part of the day. And I really try to impart on my patients that you shouldn't just deal with those things. If you're having issues, talk to your team. If you're having discomfort, talk to your team. So really talking to somebody about that and seeing if there is an issue. I really don't like to just say the CF gut is a thing and you have to deal with it. So trying to get to the bottom of it. And there's many things we can kind of look at and try different issues and different problem solving tools.
Right.
So that would be my suggestion.
Well, we are out of time, so I really want to thank all of you who participated on Zoom, and thanks to everybody on Facebook who's watching as well. And Michelle, I can't thank you enough for sharing your incredible expertise and just your wonderful presence and all your commitment to the CF community with us. Another example. So I again want to thank our sponsors of the podcast. That's Vertex Pharmaceuticals, Gilead Sciences, and Chiesi USA. And we had additional support from AbbVie and Genentech. So we are very, very grateful. I hope people will join us next month, because on October 24th, we're having another town hall meeting. This time we're going to launch into the respiratory issues. And again, it's so much more fun when we have lots of people and we can see you and really engage in a discussion. And I loved how everybody shared here, so I thank you all. And I look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.